Hi, my name is Bonnie Filker. I am founder, president, and editor of the Johns Hopkins Arts and Climate Change Movement. We are a part of the school and we are recognized by the institution as a humanitarian organization for medicine and equity. We have a free weekly course where graduate students choose topics that they've researched and give presentations, free critical lectures about climate change and its intersections of social justice and public health. And we also have a free creative nonfiction journal that people can subscribe to, or people can submit their articles to, that help further share ideas of things that people are interested in writing about. So without further ado, we're going to be going into one of my favorite topics, a lecture I gave earlier called What's a Plastic Beach? So What's a Plastic Beach by Bonnie Filker. So what does it mean to call someone plastic? What do we associate with the word plastic? When I give this lecture to live audiences, a lot of different words come back. I'll give you a second to think about it. A lot of people come and say to me things like malleable, they say fake, inauthentic, perfect. These are types of things that we collectively associate with the word plastic, and it's a good thing to keep in our minds because it's important to start to actually break apart and understand what this material actually means to us as a society, as a people. So in this lecture, we're going to be understanding the political, economy, and cultural and public health effects and relationships that humans have with plastic, to understand what a plastic beach could be. So this is important to understand the public health relationship that plastic has with, that we have with plastic. So it's actually, scientists have proven that it's associated with reduced fertility, cancers, birth defects, impaired immunity, endocrine disruption, development, and negative developmental impacts. So that's very heavy, and we're going to break that down a little bit and to understand ways that we can actually remediate our exposure to these harmful chemicals. This is actually one of my favorite interviews, and it was of Shanna Swan, who's a PhD researcher about the exposures of plastic and its negative impact on fertility. She actually found that men, women, across all species on Earth, including humans, are experiencing a 1% reduction in fertility each year due to our exposures to plastic. This was by PBS NewsHour, the interview. It's very interesting. Next slide. So when we're understanding that this is something that's actually harmful to human life, this opens up a lot of investigation, including like where else could we be getting exposed to these harmful chemicals to make sure that a remediation from our exposure to these harmful chemicals is conclusive, or as conclusive as we could possibly make it. Which brings up the fact that plastic is actually derived from crude oil and natural gas. So that's interesting and also correlated to understanding that burnt fossil fuel emissions are also likely to be associated with these negative public health impacts, which will disproportionately affect areas and communities that have higher exposures to different types of emissions. So what's a way that we can protect high-risk communities that are disproportionately communities of color, but everyone is being affected from carbon dioxide and the emissions that carry them that have these really negative public health outcomes? So one suggestion could be including carbon dioxide in the Clean Air Act. Under the first Bush presidency, the Clean Air Act went underway thanks to lots of social activism and pressure and continued efforts after the Montreal Protocol in a wave of sweeping environmental regulations that were able to reduce, through the Clean Air Act, the Bush presidency actually pushed forward using economic-based solution, cap and trade, to reduce exposures to harmful chemicals like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide. In the original legislation going through Congress, carbon dioxide was included. There was a reform in the 90s when this was put into place, where that was removed, unfortunately for people who care for the world as we exist under climate change and the effects of climate change. But anyway, that is still something that we could include in climate change to make it fair and accessible for companies to be able to trade their way out of their negative and their harmful public health emissions without shocking the business culture. So why are dangerous chemicals not checked before they enter the economy? So this is a really interesting article, and it's actually a policy that is adopted by the European Union and other countries around the world, and it basically says that if a company wants to introduce a new chemical into the economy, they have to prove that it's not harmful to human life before they introduce it to the economy. This is a lot more economically efficient and safe than the current system in the United States, where chemicals are actually sold in the United States that are banned in other countries for their proven harmful effects. So chemicals in the United States have to go through be proven to be by people harmful or the root cause of the disease that they've contracted, to be able to get that chemical banned. This is expensive for taxpayers, and this is expensive for communities, and it creates unnecessary negative public health outcomes to different communities. So what's it like before plastic? Like, when did plastic become popularized? Because it's everywhere now. It's so convenient. Sometimes it's cute. It's marketed to us, but what was it like before plastic? And that's why I think it's important to look at the art history of plastic too. And this is a famous scene. It's actually from The Graduate, study, which was produced in 1967. And this is a famous scene, and it's the father puts his hand around the young man and he goes, "Son, the future is plastics." So this is a really good indicator of what it was like for the boomer generation and their exposure to plastics, and why sometimes learning things like this is shocking, but it's important to understand that just because things are surprising, it's important to listen and understand data so that we can create a healthier future and to protect the people we care about. So when we're looking at plastic, something that's so normalized to us today, you see that actually they were right in the film. These are billion tons of plastic usage, and this is different decades. Here's 1960, here's 1970, here's 1967, and here's that movie being completely correct. Plastic has been very popular. And let's look, and in this chart you can see actually different ways and different parts of our societies, and how these different parts of our society create different levels of plastic waste that eventually gets into our ocean. So what's also important about understanding plastic usage, plastic waste generation, is to understand which countries around the world are producing the most amount of plastic waste. The darker the green, the more plastic waste the country produces. And this is important for enacting policy that can help reduce the amount of plastics that get washed into our waterways and our oceans, and also help us reduce our exposure to harmful chemicals. So, but it's so cheap. Are there even alternatives? Why hasn't recycling saved the day? These are probably all questions you're asking yourself. So there has been lots of campaigns enacted by different companies who didn't want to deal immediately with the costs of this cheap solution. And despite the public health outcomes, they started campaigns to push the burden of the waste of the product onto the consumer, which is why we have recycling campaigns instead of, bottle bills. So Coca-Cola sued for deceptive sustainability claims. This is by Earth Island Institute is recording it, and they were the people who behind this specific lawsuit, and they are one company that is suing Coca-Cola for these types of false marketing campaigns about sustainability during our ecological public health crises. I think this is a very important slide too, because it's talking about plastic waste generation by industry. As you can see at the top, it says packaging, and this is really good information for us because these are obviously harmful chemicals that we don't have infrastructure for actually taking care of. The good thing to me about reading that packaging is is by far the largest producer of plastics is that it's so easy to find alternatives to plastic wrapping, and that's actually something we're going to be talking about a little bit further on in this presentation. But so what does it mean to have, what's a plastic beach and why do I care? So this is, we were looking at all this plastic, we were watching the different parts of communities having plastic waste that was going into the oceans. We were seeing which countries were producing the most amount of plastic waste, and now we're seeing all that plastic waste that got washed into the waterways start to accumulate in different parts of the world. So these are the garbage patches that are being pulled together and accumulating by the ocean currents. And this is an up-close example of what one of those might look like. Here you see plastic coming into the ocean in the Pacific Gyre. Fishing nets are almost actually responsible for almost 50% of plastic in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is important to understand in terms of looking at ways that we can reduce the plastic exposure. One of the dangerous acts, and as you can see here, it's getting caught up in the current. One of the dangerous aspects of plastic waste is that during climate change, freshwater availability is going to be reduced, and so desalination plants are going to be more important. If plastic doesn't biodegrade, so it turns into bioaccumulation, so we're either going to be consuming it through our oceanic fisheries, exposing our bodies, or we're going to be, through desalination, drinking particulate matter, which is also exposure, which further incentivizes the importance of reducing our public health risks to that now by cleaning up our oceans and replacing non-biodegradable plastics with plant-based alternatives. So here are the different oceanic gyres of the world. There are 5 here in this image from Harvard Gazette, and they're just plastic that is caught in the ocean currents, accumulated there, turning into plastic beaches. And this is what those look like up close. Here's a snorkeler looking in this giant oceanic garbage patch, and this is what it would look like a little bit below the surface as an example of just garbage. So this, I hope you remember my earlier point about art history representing what we feel and think about in our society, and this is actually that same scene from The Graduate, but instead of the father figure, we see a investor who's really excited and prepared and is investing a lot into ecoplastics that are opening up on the stock market exchange. He said just one word, plastics. But to him, it's talking about ecoplastics, recognizing the importance or the reliance that we have at this point, how accustomed we are to plastics in our economy at this point, but also recognizing that people don't want to have reduced fertility, that 1% rate each year, that this is causing a major ecological public health crisis, not even just in humanity, but across all species. And so the longevity of continuing our exposures to these dangerous chemicals is timed if one way or the other. So this is actually a really interesting example because this is plastic straws that are biodegradable. So they're plant-based plastic straws. And this is an example of them after 8 weeks composting, almost completely biodegraded. This would be much better to reduce those earlier images we might remember of plastic beaches, of plastics that will take millions of years to biodegrade. So what's a plastic beach? This is actually one of my favorite albums by the Grills. It's considered an eco art album. And in this, when you look at the music videos and you listen to the music, you hear some of my favorite artists like Snoop Dogg and Lou Reed give predictions and lament about how senseless it is to have have these decisions made for us, and to continue to this waste culture when the business as usual track is looking pretty depressing. So here we look at the plastic beach, and in the music video and in the and in the songs, you see that all these people are searching for the last piece of land, a single plastic beach. A note that shows that the plastic beach is just an image representing the plastic beaches, the oceanic gyres of today, and it would be a pretty uninhabitable place. Thank you so much, and I hope you're as excited as us. Please stay tuned for other things. You can check out more content from Johns Hopkins Arts and Climate Change at our website, www.jhuacc.com. Thanks. Have a good one.